Hi, folks. Bob Mannery here. You're listening to A2D Radio, real sports talk radio for the fans, by the fans, no agenda. These guys are the best in the business. Hashtag it. No notes.
Welcome in, everybody, to A2D Radio. Athlete spotlight, player spotlight, former player spotlight. Doesn't matter how you want to say it, but we get former players on. We were doing this a lot when everybody was stuck at home, and one of the first guys that we ever had join us on the player spotlight, the athlete spotlight, was Adam Carriker, and we get to have him on again. Adam, it's good to have you, and good to talk to you again. I know a lot's happened since the last time we talked. And the one thing that's happened is Washington is now in first place, but we'll get into all that in a second. Tom Arnaud, Michael Chromiak, Steve Rochelle, and as mentioned, Adam Carriker on with us again. Every show we're brought to you by our doc, make him yours. That's Dr. Paul Vidal, Specialized Physical Therapy, LLC, Burlington and Cherry Hill locations. Find them on the web, specializedphysicaltherapy.com. We'll talk a little bit about the Washington football team and their aspirations of winning what is the worst division in all of sports, the NFC East. So we'll talk about that. Well, obviously, I've talked about a little bit of Nebraska, the Cornhuskers, the direction they're going as a football team. We'll talk about, obviously, a little wrestling because Chrome's here. So I know he likes to dabble in the wrestling side of things. So we'll dabble in that a little bit. And we'll get into whatever else the family out there wants us to talk about. We'll get into that as well. Adam Carriker, though, the host of Carriker Chronicles and Carriker Live. You can find them there and join us here on A2D. Adam, it's good to have you on again, and it's a pleasure to talk to you. It just feels weird that 8 months ago we're in the same spot we were 8 months ago. So I'm still talking to you in socks and shorts in the afternoon. So we're still all sort of home.
Yeah, man, I appreciate you having me on. So I remember coming on. I had forgot that we were still in this freaking thing at that point in time. For some reason, I thought it was before, but it's like the year that just. It's like that song that'll never end. It's just the year that will never end, it seems. So
it's not ending. It's not ending anytime soon. But we'll get right into the first question at hand, which is our poll question. And it's the Washington football team will win the NFC East. Do you agree or disagree? That's brought to you by Ambox Services, 20% off. Tell them the boys from A2D sent you for all your gutter guards, gutter installations. They got you covered. AmboxServices.com. The Washington football team will win the NFC East. For everybody out there joining us, you can vote for it. Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Twitch. That's where we're live. Everywhere you get your podcasts, we're there as well. Like, subscribe, follow, download. You know the deal. Chime in, conversate with us. So right off, we'll start with you, Adam. I mean, this is a team that, before we started the season, we knew it was a rebuild. We knew the direction they were going, but we knew there was definitely an upgrade of talent. And we knew bringing in Ron Rivera, when we talked about this early, like 8 months ago or whenever we talked, that we knew this was going to bring some life to this organization, a real football head coach. And, I know that, the record's not good, but if I'm a Washington fan, and we have some in the chat that chime in all the time, I'd be feeling good because I wasn't supposed to be any good, and I wasn't supposed to be competing for the division. So your thoughts on if they will win the NFC East, and just your thoughts on Washington this year.
Well, yeah, I mean, Washington fans are pretty happy to be where they're at right now. Like you said, the expectations were not high coming into this year, kind of a rebuilding process there in D.C. I mean, they're in first place in the division somehow right now. It's like the least bad of the all bad division. So I guess, by default, they're in first place, which is a Washington football team fan you're excited about. You look at the Eagles, they got a lot of talent. They're having a hard time. The Giants, you kind of knew they would struggle this year. Obviously, their quarterback's been up and down, a little bit more down than up at times. The Cowboys have just kind of, I don't know what to say about the Cowboys. They've just kind of imploded a little bit. So if you're a Washington Football Club fan, which is still a mouthful for me to say, you're feeling pretty good about where you are right now.
Absolutely, and you should be. And if we were in that situation and we were still in first place, we'd be yelling and screaming because it wouldn't be good enough. Because we're a team that we're supposed to win 10, 11 games. Same thing with the Cowboys, expected to win 10, 11 games. I don't think anybody out there really had Washington or the Giants winning more than 6 or 7 if they got lucky. I mean, I think most expectations are like, okay, maybe Washington can walk into a 7-9 season if the defense plays up to snuff and you get something out of the quarterback position. But before these guys go, because I know they got questions, just your thoughts on Alex Smith, because what a story, and now gets to be the starting quarterback again. And I love the guy. I love his toughness. I love everything he brings to the table. And to be able to come back from that is hard to do. And then to be able to play at a high level, which is anybody playing in the NFL is playing at a high level. If they're playing well or not, you're still playing at a high level. And he's played pretty well, in my opinion. Your thoughts on Alex?
It's an all-time great story, an all-time feel-good story. I didn't see the ESPN special that they did on him at first. I just saw his name all over social media, and I'm like, what's going on? So then I went back and I watched it, and as a guy myself who's been through a plethora of injuries, just the contraption, whatever that was, I don't know what that was around his leg at one point. It just looked like pieces of meat at times. And for him to work 2-3 years now to get all the way back to the point, I honestly thought it'd be pretty cool if he just made the active roster and he maybe got to take a couple of snaps here and there. Obviously, Washington Football Club fans were hoping that, Dwayne Haskins would take the bull by the horns a little bit more. But you're watching Alex, and he's a starter. He's doing a pretty good job. And you consider he's an older guy, everything he's been through. I mean, how can you not help but root for and be an Alex Smith fan at this point?
Absolutely. I mean, listen, I don't hate, like I think we talked about this before. I don't hate Washington and the Giants as much as I hate the Cowboys because they're real fans. So, in a season like this where we're not playing well at all, I'm almost rooting for them in a way to win this division over the Giants. I'm almost rooting for them because they've just been ever since RG3 and that little run, you thought they were going in the right direction, and just the injury and then they went south again. And it's just an organization that, a lot on Daniel Snyder, obviously, but an organization that hasn't been right. And, I know their fans are loyal and diehard just like Eagles fans. So, I'm sort of rooting for them on here. I mean, we still have a chance to win the division. I don't even want it, but somebody else can have it. But I'm rooting for Washington. I'm rooting for Alex Smith. I'm rooting for Ron Rivera. A lot of great stories tied around Washington this year. Which if you're just a fan of the sport, how can you not like it? So Chrome, Steve, as well.
Yeah, you're completely right with Ron Rivera, his story with Alex Smith. I mean, like you said, even if you're not a Washington football team fan, I mean, there's so many things to root for within that team and things of that nature that it's hard not to root for them. So, I was there in 2012, and it's just, I mean, if you're someone who's rooted for the Washington football team, it's been a roller coaster, man. And you finally got something good to feel about. Finally got, a legit reason to be rooting for the team other than you just want them to be good. Coming into this year, they have 5 first-round picks along that front. And beyond that, you really didn't know. You're like, okay, hopefully we can stop the run and get a little bit of pressure on the quarterback. But what else is really going to happen this year? And as it unfolds, it's kind of been cool to watch as this season has gone along. There's been cool things about this season. There's obviously been a lot of things that have been crazy about this season, like, I don't know, a 3:00 NFL football game on a Wednesday, and then the Ravens, and then they're going to play again on a Sunday. So good luck to those teams. But, this has been one of the cool things to watch.
Absolutely. It definitely has. Cromer, Steve?
Go ahead, Chrome. I know you're waiting.
What's up, Adam? Good, brother. GBR. Quick, so looking at Washington, and again, I echo everything you guys said, the Alex Smith story, and really just the way that this franchise has rebuilt itself, and looking at the defense, and I think that that's been a pivotal point. You look at that defensive line and adding Chase Young this year. Can you talk about how much that defense has evolved from past years and some of the effects that you've seen with some of these younger guys that they've brought in through the draft?
Yeah, so, I mean, when I was there, it was more of a read and react across the front, more of a Pittsburgh Steelers 3-4, and now it's a little bit more attacking, a little bit more aggressive, and they've got the guys to do it up front as well. So it's one of those things where there's high expectations along the front, and I know Chase Young missed a few games, but when he's been on the field, he has played well. He is something to get excited about. He can be a cornerstone. You can build that defense around along with all the other pieces they have across the front. So it's something where they've kind of evolved into a little bit more of an aggressive style defense. And I think it's something that's going to ultimately serve them really well over time.
Yeah, piggybacking off of Chrome's question, obviously you're a former defensive lineman. What would have been like the play along this front with these guys?
It would have been awesome because they can't really choose anyone to double team. A lot of times when there's one really good pass rusher, they'll slide the protection that way, or they'll put a tight end, or they'll chip with the back. When you got multiple guys, you got to kind of pick your poison Because if you're sliding one way, the other guy's going to probably get a back on him. Or if you're not double teaming, then you got one-on-ones. And so for me, that's something that would have been, pretty cool, is to have, just that talent along the front. And this is one of the more talented fronts probably in the entire NFL. It's kind of something cool that they've built there. And it's something that they, like I said, they can continue to build around as a whole for that organization.
And that's one of the things you got to be terrified if you're an Eagles fan, because you probably have one of the most expensive defense fronts, and you look down the road as Washington's done with not even a fraction of that salary. It's a terrifying thing to think of, especially if you're Carson Wentz in that offensive line, considering how we've looked this season.
Well, I mean, a lot of those guys are still on their rookie deals. So if you're Washington, that you're kind of like when the Rams went to the Super Bowl and Jared Goff was still on his rookie deal, so they could pay everyone else around him. So that's something, at a certain point, they are going to have to start paying those guys. But right now, they got a lot of young guys, and they got a lot of guys that aren't as expensive as other guys because they're still on their rookie deals.
Yeah, I still think Young's going to be the X factor on that defense moving forward over the next few years, though, for sure.
Yeah, I thought it was crazy before the draft when people were like, are the Redskins not going to take Chase Young? Are they going to do something else? I was like, what? I don't understand why this is a debate. Somebody's got to help me out here. Like, they're going to take Chase Young if he is there. So obviously they took him. But before the draft, I was just perplexed as to why it was even a debate or conversation.
It's the normal thing that happens draft day. There's always something. Oh, well, the normal team that makes the bad decision, or are they going to make the bad decision and pass on this guy? When most times it's obvious, it's like, listen, they have a need there. They have a need in that along that front line. He's going to Washington. I don't know why we're talking about this, and it's probably sometimes to get people to kind of think it's going elsewhere to make other people go do their crazy things.
Well, I mean, in the NFL, there is a lot of smoke screens. I'll never forget. Yeah. I was talking to my agent, and he's like, "Okay, who's been calling you? Who hasn't?" And he knew who had been bringing me in and who hadn't to kind of talk with me. He goes, "A lot of times it doesn't mean much. There's teams that will bring you in, and that means they're not interested. Like the fact that the Broncos at the time with Shanahan had not brought me in. He's like, oh, that's phenomenal. That means they're really interested in you. I'm like, what? They don't know anything about me. He's like, trust me, they know plenty about you, but they don't bring in guys they're interested in. And so, and obviously some teams do bring in guys that they're interested in. Like with the Rams, when I went and visited them, one of their scouts flat out looked at me and said, you should start looking at real estate around here. And I told my agent that. He goes, well, it could mean something. It could mean nothing. I don't know. Obviously it ended up meaning something, but there's so many smoke screens in the NFL. So that could be part of it as well. Part of it is sometimes you just need something to talk about as well.
Yeah, well, I mean, we're seeing a lot of screens here in Philadelphia. We're trying to put flames in on this and that and the third, and starting to see, people turning on Carson Wentz in the media. Doug Peterson isn't doing him any favors, and it's starting to look like Howie could be staying after all. You don't know what Jeffrey Lurie's going to do. You're a player on the outside looking in. We're fans looking for some answers here, so. What do you think would you do in your position if you're somebody in management looking at this Eagles team and saying, hey, what I would do move forward to try to fix the waves of this one ship that's just a few years ago, in a championship?
I mean, the Eagles have a talented team. There's no debating that. They've got a lot of ability, a lot of talent. It just hasn't seemed to come to fruition so far yet this year. You look at Carson Wentz, and obviously his numbers and some of the things he's done haven't been great, but I would almost start up front. I would almost start with the offensive line, because there's some times where he doesn't, and he has time sometimes, but there's a lot of times where he doesn't have time. If you don't have time, it's hard to make good decisions. And I'm not saying that he can't bear a lot of the blame as well, because as the quarterback, when you win, you get too much of the credit. When you lose, you get too much of the blame. That's just part of the job description. But I would start with the offensive line. If you can't block and tackle, football is still at its core blocking and tackling. If you take blocking and tackling out of football, it becomes flag football. So at the end of the day, right now they cannot protect Carson Wentz well enough, and that's where I would start with the Eagles football team.
Which is sort of sad. Which is sort of sad because coming in, this was an offensive line on paper that was probably a top 5 offensive line in football. When you talk about Brandon Brooks, Lane Johnson, Jason Kelsey. You were probably gonna, before he got hurt, your first round pick Andre Dillard was gonna be playing your blind side spot. Sal Malo, who's been a good guard in this league and it's gotten better every year up until this year. So you're coming into and you're thinking, this is a really good roster because it starts up front. You know, they've spent so much money on the defensive side up front, which is more than anybody in football. And the offensive side, Howie Roseman has done a good job of putting a good offensive line together through his tenure here. But my question to you, because we sometimes overvalue our own, and that's the big thing here in Philadelphia. We overvalue our own. I see it more since even starting this 5 years ago. I see people overvalue our own way too much. You know, do we overvalue this roster coming in? Do we overvalue Carson Wentz a little bit coming in? Did we overvalue Doug Peterson? Like as a guy that's not in the everyday like we are, did we overvalue this a little bit? And maybe this roster was more of an 8-8 thing, which would be more of an indictment on our general manager?
I don't think so, because my son Jacob, man, he loves football, and he's always quizzing me about this team and that team. And you know, obviously, some teams I know more about than others. But when he's like, "Okay, Dad, who's got a shot in the NFC to win the Super Bowl?" This is before a game was ever played. You know, the Saints came to mind, and I didn't name the Bucks at that point in time, even though everyone's got his technical shot. But I named the Saints, I named the Eagles, and I named some teams like that. When you look at who you have on the team from the outside looking in, you look like a team that should be able to contend. As a guy who isn't as familiar with the Eagles as some other folks, obviously you guys that are there all the time, it almost appears to me like they've had more success with Nick Foles than they did with Carson Wentz. And for me, it's almost like you got the talent, you got the ability, but it just doesn't seem to come together when Carson Wentz is at the quarterback spot. And I know I just offended him with the offensive line thing, but just as a guy who watches from the outside, that's almost kind of been the weird perception for me anyways.
No, it's fair. It's fair to have that perception, because perception's reality. And reality is I love Carson Wentz. I'm a huge defender of Carson Wentz. I call him my son half the time. But, you know, I can only defend you so long when I've watched other big-time when I watch another big-time franchise quarterback in this city get crushed day in, day out. And Donovan McNabb in his tenure here, and all he did was win football games. And all he did was raise the level of guys around him. Now, granted, he had 2 Hall of Fame tackles in his tenure here, and Trey and John Runyon. That helps. That helps with your protection for sure. But I mean, he had slim pickings for the most part too, and he raised the level of the guys around him, similar to what Carson did at the end of last year, where we saw him raise the level of everyone around him. And I give him a lot of passes, but at some point I'm like, you know, greatness is supposed to do that. You know, I'm not paying you per se for the first 3 quarters of football. I'm paying you to win in the fourth. And that doesn't mean the other 3 quarters don't matter, but I don't care if you struggle through the game. What we saw last year is he struggled through a lot of games down the stretch. But when push came to shove, like in that Giants game a few weeks back, when push came to shove, he made enough big plays to help his team win. And I know that's a lot to ask for year in, year out. So my last question about Eagles is, when you're resilient for 3 straight years like they were, Super Bowl, all their captains, everybody wearing a C, none of them played in the Super Bowl, and you go the following year, the injuries added up again, and then you go last year where it was a train wreck injury-wise, and then you roll into this year. Does the resiliency just wear out and you have one of them years where just you have a setback? I mean, it's just natural, right?
I mean, that is a possibility for sure. I can't help but wonder with the injuries to the team and maybe Carson himself. I mean, sometimes as a player, you have a certain attitude, you have a certain swagger, and you have a certain fearlessness. Like, I'm not going to get hurt. I'm untouchable. And especially everybody, I think a lot of people have that when they're young. Like, nothing's ever going to happen to me that's bad. And you kind of have that as an NFL football player. And obviously he's had the injuries, and he's had them multiple times in multiple years. It's been an issue for him, and it's taken him out of football seasons. And I can't help but wonder if that's affected kind of that aura, that confidence, that swagger that maybe he had, and maybe he doesn't play and have with that same fearlessness that he once did. Because I remember it was his MVP season, was the 2nd year in the league or something like that. Like, he doesn't look like the same guy. It's not like he's gone off the cliff physically. He's not old enough for that. So mentally he should be better because he's been in the league longer. So why is the play not at the same level? I can't help but wonder if all these injuries have had an effect on him and his approach mentally, and just, you know, how he approaches and attacks the game.
I mean, everyone likes to throw that mental thing out there. Also, got to remember, like, how many different receivers has he played with? How many, like at the position player? He never gets he gets a guy that he goes to, and then go down, and then they're out for a significant period of time, and he's having to continually change who he can rely on in situations, and it things off. And then you have situations where you flat out hearing from members of media who break down film that the guys flat out running wrong routes, and he's wound up having problems where you think he's supposed to go somewhere. He thinks the guy's going there. Boom, interception, boom, incompletion, 3 and out, whatever. And then you also have Doug with I think his ego's gotten to the point, and it's not like, I think, like an overinflated thing that he had to go without the offensive coordinator this year. And Tommy had touched on this throughout the week, that you've seen it in other places where they've done terrible. And you go back and look at what they've done this offseason. They went and got an offensive coordinator, and all of a sudden, wow, look, they're back to having, back to that winning trend instead of having these absolute putrid offensive performances. And then look, he's finally given up that play calling now. But you have to wonder if all these little things kind of play into the factor of why we're seeing Carson having these issues.
Yeah, I mean, here's the thing. He's shown he can do it. He like I said, physically, he's still able to do it. Okay, I'm sure the injuries, he feels a little bit more banged up. That happens when you get hurt. But he's not old enough to where there should be any sort of cliff anywhere in sight. For me, I would start with the offensive line, getting some continuity. Maybe you got to look at the athletic training staff. I mean, the Washington Football Club fired their athletic trainer last year, and they won some big award. I forget the name of it, just the year before. Now, I was with those guys. I'll tell you right now, I was not a fan of them. I did not like them, and I couldn't believe they won an award, and I couldn't believe they hung around as long as they did. And when they got fired, I actually said something about it on Twitter. I said they're the worst training staff I've ever seen, and they had no professionalism either. And so for me, I'm talking about the Washington football one, not the Eagles. With the Eagles, though, when you have continued injuries, which is why the Washington Football Club training staff eventually got let go, you got to look at the training staff. Okay, you got to look at the strength and conditioning staff. Sometimes it's just a string of good luck. Sometimes it's a string of bad luck. But when it's year after year after year, you do have to look there as well. Carson has shown he can do it. I would build with the offensive line, try to get some continuity at the wide receiver position. And if he can get that flow, that confidence, some of that back, I think that would help a lot because, as you guys have alluded to, you spent a lot of money on defense as well. And I don't know Doug Peterson. I've never met him, never chatted with him. This is pure speculation. When he won the Super Bowl, it wasn't that many years before that, and you guys would probably know a specific number. He was coaching in high school. So at the time, I remember thinking, wow, I wonder how this is going to affect him, because it's awesome that he won the Super Bowl. Clearly, he's a really good football coach, but sometimes when things come really quick, really soon, it almost seems really easy. And sometimes, maybe the brain can get a little big, full of itself, and maybe that can affect you negatively going forward. I remember wondering that at the time. So maybe that is having something to do with it now, because you guys do have the talent. And I know the injuries, but some of that, it absolutely has to fall back on the coach, though.
You can't forget how to coach. I don't think guys forget how to coach in this league. I don't think guys forget how to play in this league. I mean, I think guys have down years, but I do completely agree with you where, egos get involved sometimes. When you have that much success, it's hard not to. It's hard for us to sit home and believe that doesn't really happen when you go from a team that you're, after your first year of being a head coach, you win the Super Bowl the next year, and the way you went about it too, where you take Brady and Belichick out, you take the GOATs out, and with your backup quarterback. I mean, I don't know how you don't get a little bit of an ego from that. I don't know how your organization does it. Jeffrey Lurie's been searching for a Super Bowl since he took over, since the Andy Reid era. So, for him as an owner, I'm sure he gets a little bit of a big head from it. How can you not? The GM, Howie Roseman, who I've never really been a fan of, but I understand how he could get a big head from it. He made a lot of big moves that year to help get us there. So I get it. I think that has something to do with it. I think that organizations that aren't kumbaya and can't all sit at the same table and get stuff done are the ones that fail. And I feel like I'm watching this organization since February that them three can't sit at the table and have a conversation with each other because everybody thinks they have all the answers. And in any walk of life, I say it's all the time. If you think you have all the answers, you already failed. And I think that's where they're at right now. It doesn't mean they can't get it right, and doesn't mean they can't come back down to earth. But right now, it's bleak. It's bleak here in Philly, but I'm done talking about the Eagles. I'm done talking about Philly. There's other stuff I know we want to talk about. So go ahead, Cromer.
Yeah. So I want to make sure we're sitting here and we did a draft special. And after the NFL draft special we did this year, we looked at Washington as one of the big winners. And I think we'd be remiss to not mention, the situation at the running back position for them and the job that Antonio Gibson has done this year. I mean, he's averaging a touchdown a game, and this is coming into a rookie year where you were expected to be the RB1, or I'm sorry, RB2 or RB3 behind Darius Geis. And obviously that situation came about as it did towards the beginning of the year. So can you just talk about, the job that Antonio Gibson has done and what a kind of a game changer he's been for the offense?
Oh, he's done a good job. I mean, so the quarterback position, as we chatted about, Dwayne Haskins, people wanted to take the bull by the horns. Obviously, that didn't necessarily happen. And now you've got Alex Smith stepping in, doing an admirable job. But, I mean, Alex isn't as mobile as he once was, as we all know. Little older, everything he's been through. So you're going to rely on that run game and being able to run the ball first. And that's going to set up and make everybody's life easier, from protecting the quarterback as an offensive line to throwing the ball as a quarterback. Because if they know you can't run the ball, everything becomes 1,000 times harder. So, I mean, he's a young guy who's come in, as you mentioned, not highly, high expectations. And he's come in, he's exceeded everything, and he's done a very good job. And he's absolutely helped make a difference, on that offense for the Washington football team. Still weird for me to say.
Did we even answer? I don't know if we even did this because we had so much. We come in, we have so much to talk about. Did we even, while we're on Washington, did we even all answer the poll question? The Washington football team will win the NFC East. I don't even know if we did agree or disagree. So I'm going to agree. I think they're better than the Giants. I mean, with no Daniel Jones, I don't know how they win a division or even compete. They're better than us right now, and everybody's better than Dallas. So I'll agree to it. What do you guys say?
I would agree to the poll, absolutely. And for all the same reasons you did, I think that defense is a game changer. And if Antonio Gibson and Alex Smith steadying the quarterback position can be more than adequate for that offense to let that defense really carry them, I think it's even possible they could win a playoff game.
Especially if it's Tampa they wound up with. I still think Tampa is a fractured team. And I agree to the poll. I think they're the team that's going to come out. Not just the Alex Smith story, not just the Ron Rivera story. They have guys who can play and guys who can make plays on offense. We already talked about how good the defense was. We knew how good the defense was even before they got Chase Young this offseason. So we already knew what it was. And like I said, we'll see what happens, but I'm agreeing with the poll. I don't think there's another team in the NFC East that's going to really push them. You might hear some Giants fans may have some rumblings, but I mean, at the end of the day, I don't think anyone's more complete to win it as far as what we're talking about with the NFC East. But I'm with you, Crum. I could see them sneaking in there, winning it, depending on who comes out of that matchup.
I think they'll probably win it. And I think, Alex Smith actually could be a difference maker this year, because without him, I'm not sure what they're doing at the quarterback position. So I think him coming in there steadying things, like you mentioned, makes a big difference. The other thing is, like, who in the NFC East, because right now the Redskins have a lead. It's not large by any stretch of the imagination, but who in the NFC East is going to go on a run and win 2 or 3 games? Like, I don't know who's going to do that to catch them and pass them. So it's almost one of those things where they've got the lead. They don't have to do anything great to keep it. I just don't know who's going to take it from them as well. So I'll agree with the poll question as well. I think the Washington football team does win the NFC East.
It's kind of right time, right place right now for them. They happen to be at this point in the year where it's so kind of wild. And you're right, a team would have to go on a run at this point. They happen to be that team at the top of the heap who's in the best position, and they jockeyed for the best position to this point.
Yeah. Well, I mean, listen, I don't know how anybody who picks anybody else with a straight face right now. Like, I don't know how anybody would be like, yeah, I think the Eagles still got a shot. Like, I mean, yeah, sure, everybody has a shot. You still got football left to play, but I mean, it's hard pressed for me to pick any team. This might be the first poll question in the history of A2D where it's been all grease. Everybody's been on the same side. But let's switch to the college game a little bit, and let's talk a little bit about Nebraska. And as a former Cornhusker, what needs to be done to get back to that football royalty? And is Scott Frost the answer?
Oh, man, you pose that like I have the answer ready, man. If I had the answer ready, I'd be making $5 million a year like Scott Frost. With the Huskers, it's I'll be honest with you, kind of like the Eagles. It's a little perplexing because you guys have the talent, the ability, the coaching experience to be really, really good. We have more talent Okay, if you go by recruiting rankings, and anybody in the NFC East, in the Big Ten West, okay, so we have the talent. Scott Frost was the most highly sought after coach in recent college football memory that I can think of. Okay, but it isn't gelling for some reason, and that's the big question: is what's going on. So I did a show the other day, and I look back at the last 10 years of recruiting rankings, in college football, because this is Nebraska's 10th season in the Big Ten. And it hasn't been since 2014. It's been 6 years since we haven't had the top-ranked class in the Big Ten West. And I talk about Big Ten West because we got to start by beating Purdue, and we got to start by beating Illinois and teams in the Big Ten West where we can talk about anything else. It's been 6 years since we haven't had the top-ranked class, and we had the second class behind Wisconsin, narrowly beating us out in 2014. And in the last 10 years, 9 times we've had the highest-rated class in the Big Ten West, yet this could potentially be our 4th straight year not going to a bowl game. We've only played in the Big Ten championship game 1 time. So what gives? Because I am kind of tired of hearing the cupboard is bare. We got to restock the cupboard. Well, really? Because why do we have to restock, and why is it any more bare than anyone else? And I always take recruiting rankings with a grain of salt. But for me, all these players leaving. So the Big Ten, obviously the transfer portal, has forever changed college football. Nebraska has had 38 players that have transferred and left. All right. That's most of anyone in the Big Ten. Second is Penn State, if you're wondering why they're struggling so much. Okay. 4th is Michigan, if you're wondering why they're struggling so much. You know who's had the least amount of players leave? Nebraska's had 38. Northwestern's had 5, which is probably why they're in first place in the Big Ten West. Indiana was about 3rd from the bottom, least amount that have left and transferred. I mean, you want to talk about continuity, and you want to talk about player development, especially in college football, player development. It's hard to develop players who are not there. Okay, and Scott will talk about, hey, we're young on offense. We got a lot of freshmen. Well, yeah, that's because people keep leaving. So if you sign 25 guys in a recruiting class, and we've had 5 leave from just our most recent recruiting class, that's 20% of the players you were counting on. Now there's holes. We got to fill them with who's there. Who do you have? Freshmen. Why? Because they haven't left yet. I hope nobody else leaves, but you get my point. So to me, the biggest thing is, where is the disconnect? There's a disconnect in either the type of player we're recruiting, okay, not the athlete, but the individual themselves, because every system is different. Okay, Steve Spurrier won a national title in '96 doing the fun and gun, 4 and 5 wide, passing the ball 50, 60 times a game. Nebraska won it the year before, triple option power football, running it 50, 60 times a game. Well, if Danny Werfel plays for Nebraska, he's not going to work out. If Tommy Frazier plays for Steve Spurrier, it's not going to work out. So it's not just about the athlete, it's about the individual. Then the coaches do have to look at themselves, and they got to evaluate themselves. What do we need to do differently? Okay. And then, it's interesting because I wonder if the transfer portal, and it has, but is this just a part of college football? You look at Michigan, look at Penn State, look at Nebraska, look at all these other schools where they've had these players leaving, 30 plus players. Is this just dealing with a newer generation and the transfer portal? Is this just part of college football at this point? Okay. And it's probably a little bit of everything I've just said, who they're recruiting, what the coaches are doing themselves, and college football is probably going to be forever different because of this. And part of me hopes and wonders that potentially this could be part of, I'm rooting for this. We'll see if it actually is the case. Is this how you build the program at Nebraska? Unfortunately, it kind of sucks and it's going to take longer. Is this how you build it with the right pieces? Because I talked about this, earlier this week on my show. Barry Alvarez, former Nebraska guy, took Nebraska philosophies, took them to Wisconsin in 1990, okay, and built Wisconsin up. The previous 6 years, 84 through 90, leading up to 90, they won 7 Big Ten conference games in 6 years. Okay, they were pretty bad. Okay, his first year they won 1 game. His first 3 years they won 3 games, won 11 games. I'm sorry, and he had over 50 players leave the program. And this was in a different time and era where it wasn't so easy. Over 50 players, and then in '93 they win the Rose Bowl. And since '93, only 1 team has been to more Rose Bowls than them, and that's USC. USC's been to 7, Wisconsin's been to 6, and they've won 3. So for me, I'm hoping it's number 4. This is just how it's going to be built. But I know it's a combination of 1, 2, and 3. And if you look at Penn State, Michigan, any of these other programs that are trying to build something right now, it's a combination of 1, 2, 3. And I think everybody for their own program hopes it's number 4, that this is just how it has to be built nowadays with the transfer portal making things so easy to go elsewhere.
Does Mackenzie Milton he still has years left, right?
I believe he's got one more year left.
Yeah, one more year left, right?
In the transfer portal. Yeah.
Any connection there, you think?
Oh, yeah, there's a connection there. I mean, last time Scott Frost, had success as a coach, an undefeated season, that was his quarterback. And obviously he suffered a horrific injury, and he's been battling to come back from it. This is 2 years now. And so he's leaving UCF, going to go elsewhere. And obviously the first thing on Nebraska fans' minds is, do we bring him in? Should we bring him in? And I posed it as a question on my Twitter and Facebook page because I didn't have a definitive answer, and I still don't. It's literally 60-40 with the responses I got. 60% of Nebraska fans say yes, 40 say no. I think my wife made a good point, though, because I was chatting with her about it. And because a lot of people in Nebraska are like, oh, we passed on Joe Burrows. Look how that worked out. Well, it's not exactly the same thing because Joe Burrows didn't have, the injury that Mackenzie Milton had. So we don't know if he's going to be that same type of player. You don't exactly know. So for me, at this point in time, I still haven't figured out what I think. My gut, honestly, probably says no because you're trying to build with younger guys. But at the same time, if he brought him in, we don't have a distinct starter quarterback right now, so I don't think it's a wrong decision either.
And that was going to be my follow-up question, actually. Adrian Martinez, Luke McCaffrey, it almost just seemed like a flip-flop between quarterbacks at this point, a real instability at that position, which is probably the most pivotal position on the field that you really need to have that reliable guy. Which one do you believe is the answer? Or do you believe the answer is not on this team and that maybe we're looking at next year's recruiting class or something where we can finally find the answer at quarterback?
So if you do look to the future, and I'll come back to your original question, if you do look to the future, Logan Smothers was a highly rated recruit, dual threat quarterback, and he's redshirting this year. I do think they could just throw him out, although if we're trying to get any sort of continuity, putting a third quarterback on the field may not help. But he's a kid with a bright future. As for right now, man, Adrian Martinez, it's kind of like a Carson Wentz type deal. He looked so good his freshman year, and he just hasn't looked the same since. He doesn't have that same explosiveness. I remember going into his sophomore year, and I love that they're working out and lifting and bringing back Husker power the way it used to be. But he put on like 20 pounds, and I was like, wow, that is – or I think it was 25. I was like, wow, that's a lot. I was like, is he going to have the same speed, explosiveness? And he just hasn't had it. He hasn't had it ever since. Now, he's not slow, but if you go back and watch him as a freshman and compare him to now, there's a distinct difference. I've always thought maybe he should lighten up a little bit, and I know he was working hard trying to put on proper muscle mass. He's the better passer at the moment. He's completing 68% of his passes this year, okay? But nobody can throw the ball downfield right now. I think Adrian in the last game completed one pass beyond 20 yards, only attempted 4 beyond 10, which could be why his completion percentage is so high. Luke's, his completion percentage is less, and his attempts downfield are even less, but he's a better runner, a little bit more hitching the giddy up, if you will, as far as the long end speed, change of direction, things of that nature. For right now, I don't think there is an answer at the moment. I think if you look long term, and I love Adrian and I love the way he's handled it, it's probably going to come down to either Luke and his development as a passer or Logan Smothers, unless they do bring in a Mackenzie Milton.
Would it be a good bridge to gap Mackenzie Milton in your eyes? Like, would it be a good bridge to have say, you know what? I mean, that will help with recruiting and help with everything. Winning games helps with everything. It calms everybody down. Would bringing him back with Scott Frost and being a better football team help with everything and give the younger quarterback another year, the redshirt freshman that you're just talking about, that extra year to just get a little bit more time and seasoning under his belt.
I mean, potential. I mean, you talk about Luke McCaffrey. I think something a lot of people don't realize is this is really only his third year as a quarterback. So his first 2 years, his older brother was the quarterback at Valor High School, where he played in Denver, Colorado. And then his junior year, he was about half quarterback. He was like a little bit of a slash, like Cordell Stewart. So his senior year, he was a full-time quarterback. His first year, he redshirted last year and now this year. So he's a young quarterback who has a lot to learn. And I wish they'd use him in more of a slash type situations like they did against Ohio State with Adrian on the field as well. If they brought in Mackenzie, I think the positives would be, I mean, he's had success in this offense. He can teach these guys how this is supposed to be ran, how this is supposed to work. You're supposed to have coaches for that as well. But when you have a player who's done that, I mean, it carries a little bit of extra weight. The risk you run is he, what can he actually still do? Okay, the risk you run is it's already really starting to get full quarterback room when you got Adrian and you got Luke, and next year you got Logan, and then you add McKenzie. You could have guys leaving, which I could argue maybe that's not a bad thing, because right now we're trying to figure out who the starter is, and maybe if you just eliminate some of that, guys get more reps, it becomes more clear potentially. So with McKenzie, like I said, I'm still on the fence. I see pluses, I see negatives and things of that nature. I really don't think there's a wrong answer, to be honest with you. I think if you bring him in, there's pluses. I think if you don't bring him in, there's pluses, negatives to that as well.
Yeah, I agree. Greg says, I'm sure it was more of a surprise, but Luke definitely played decently against Penn State, but is super young, and that did show up at times for sure.
Well, that's kind of why when I point to the future, like this is Adrian's third year in the system. You kind of know what he's going to be. So when I look to the future, I look to a guy that's still got a lot of, not that Adrian can't get better. And again, I'm a huge fan of how he's handled all of this as a human being. But you look to the future, Luke has probably more room for growth. And the one thing I do find interesting is the up-tempo offense that Scott Frost likes to run. For some reason, he doesn't run it with Adrian at quarterback. But when Luke goes in, they immediately go to up-tempo offense. So I'm a little confused as to why a guy who's been here for 3 years doesn't run the up-tempo offense, but a guy who's a redshirt freshman does. That's something that's very curious to me.
Yeah, that is strange, because the way you play is the way you play. I mean, the way you coach, your style is is what got you there, right? And it's what got Scott Frost here, that he ran an up-tempo offense and all that. It's strange to me, because then you're working on two different things throughout the week of practice. You're working on slowing things down and running fast. I mean, I think that's got to, because it's not just a quarterback. It's not just a quarterback doing it. You're talking about everybody, the other 10 guys around them. Change the style they play.
I can't help but wonder, and Luke started a couple games, and he showed what he could do, and he also showed his youth. So at this point in time, they're probably going to start Adrian. They haven't said, but they're probably going to start Adrian on Saturday and then rotate and see who gets the hot hand if somebody does. But, I can't help but wonder if Scott's being maybe a little too loyal, because Adrian was kind of dubbed as his guy when he first got here. I mean, everyone kind of knew that. And, when Scott played in 96, he had a rough 96 season. Okay. Early 97, he gets benched for a drive against UCF of all teams. Frankie London plays, and then Scott comes back in, he gets booed by the home fans in Memorial Stadium. Okay. That's never left him, but Osborne stuck with him, and that turned out pretty good. From the Washington game on that year, it did pretty well. And I can't help but wonder if Scott has that loyalty to Adrian because Osborne had that loyalty to him. And again, Adrian's a good player. He still can get better, and I'm still a big fan of him, but I can't help but wonder if it's maybe a little bit to Scott's detriment, because like you said, what got him here? Oregon, UCF, up-tempo, snap the ball every 18 seconds with the Ducks, every 24 seconds at UCF, which was still really fast. We're not doing that here. And if Adrian's, for some reason, not as good at it as Luke is, you got to play the cards that got you to the table, man. So I can't help but wonder if his loyalty to Adrian is maybe being a little bit detrimental at this point in time.
The loyalty question always raises its head, especially when we're talking about quarterbacks, because that relationship between coach and quarterback is always so close, and like you said, like it's one of those things where it might be a detriment to him right now to continue to have that loyalty to it when you can clearly see when you're running the up tempo, your offense runs better, your team performs better. It's almost like the same thing what we're seeing here in Philadelphia. You see when Carson is running the ball and in that fast-paced offense, he's making things happen a little bit where he doesn't have those times to worry about having to take those 8-step drops or whatever that they have him doing. One of those same kind of scenarios here. You have to what is you do best, what he does best, keep it going. Don't go back to whatever's there because you feel like you owe it to that person.
Yeah, no, for sure. It's interesting. I remember my last year in DC, RG3, Robert, he wanted to go up tempo like what he'd done at Baylor. And his rookie year, obviously, they'd had a ton of success. We're going into year 2. We got the whole knee thing and the whole, oh my God, all the slogans that came out that year, and that's all people could talk about. And he didn't want to run the zone read anymore. And then his dad was very vocal. That was all wonderful stuff. But anyways, he wanted to, within the locker room, he made it very well known he wanted to go up tempo like he did at Baylor. And he talked to Shanahan about it. And Shanahan, speaking of coaches, I mean, Shanahan's been in the league for like 30 plus years. He won a couple of rings with the Niners as an assistant coach, obviously a couple of times with the Broncos as a head coach. So he's got plenty of clout, but he wanted none of it. And his whole reason was, if we're going up tempo, and let's say we go 3 and out, 4 and out, whatever the case may be, and our defense is right back on, you're wearing out the defense. His philosophy was how it affected the entire team. Okay, but Robert had great success at Baylor with it. And ultimately, I'll never forget, they talked about it multiple times, and one day Robert came down and he was just fuming. And if you remember, it was kind of, Robert that maybe got Shanahan fired a little bit in D.C. I don't know if many people talked about it or even known about it. A lot of it at the core was the zone read and the fact that Robert wanted to go up tempo and Shanahan did not. So it's kind of it was an interesting scenario talking about what's worked for you, because multiple things can work, like Spurrier versus Osborne's offense back in the 90s. But it was kind of a meeting of the mind/egos, especially going into Robert's second year of, hey, I've won Super Bowls with this. Hey, I did all this last year with this. I've done it up to this point. And they just kind of conflicted and they couldn't come to an agreement. And somebody had to go. And at that point in time, they weren't going to get rid of the quarterback. So kind of going along the lines of, hey, this is what you've had success with. Well, they couldn't get to the table and agree on how to have success together long term.
So let me ask you this. Well, first of all, just the comment here. I know this is Baron Riesland in Omaha. She says they need to refocus on in-state recruiting and go back to the roots here in Nebraska with the running game, bring the fullback position back. Just a quick reaction to that. And I also want to ask your gut feeling. 3 years from now, is Scott Frost the head coach of Nebraska football?
Oof. Let me put off that last one for a minute so I can think about it. Yeah, as far as in-state, so he is making a concerted effort with the walk-on program, which is obviously probably 99% in-state. Here's what's interesting, and I don't have the numbers in front of me. I wish I did. But there have been 4, 5, 6 big-time in-state Nebraska recruits that he's gone after. Okay, Callahan didn't always go after them. Riley didn't always go after them strong. I know Pelini didn't for sure sometimes. And they would end up going to Iowa, and then they'd throw the bones in our stadium as Iowa was freaking beating us. Or they'd be drafted in the top 10 like Noah Fant was, or right in the top 15. A kid right out of Omaha. Frost is going after them. What's interesting, they're choosing to go elsewhere. That's the interesting thing. And there are some theories behind it. I've had former players, throw some theories out there. Nobody really knows for sure. But that's the interesting part is he is trying to make Nebraska, in that 500-mile radius around Nebraska, a refocused thing. But he's not having the success at getting them to come in, as obviously an Osborne did, or as much as Frost would like. And so all 5 guys who've left the Husker program this year, they're all 5 from Florida. So he's kind of got that Florida pipeline from his UCF days. The problem is they're not staying around. The kids locally, in-state in that 500-mile radius, a lot of them, like my dream was to play in Nebraska. That was my dream. The NFL, I'll be honest, it was an afterthought for me. I'm good enough to play in the NFL. Okay, cool. I'll never forget my junior year. There was a guy who wrote an article after my first 4 games. I had 4 sacks, and the guy wrote an article that I had already decided to declare for the NFL. And I was like, what the hell are you talking about? I've never even thought about the NFL. It never even occurred to me. So for me, I think the issue is a lot of the Nebraska kids nowadays, it isn't necessarily their dream to play at Nebraska anymore. Maybe some of these other theories that I hear from former players that played in the 90s could be connected to it as well. I don't know. But he needs to have more success. Because the focus is there. He needs to have more success in getting them to come in my opinion. Oh, you spoke about the fullback position, too. He has no fullbacks on his roster. We actually had one when he first got here. It was Les Miles' son, and he transferred. I think he went to A&M. But he doesn't have any fullbacks. So he has a lot of tight ends. He uses them on special teams in place of fullbacks, and he just doesn't use fullbacks. I think a lot of times the quarterback being the extra runner, he spreads you out. And then you have an extra blocker because the quarterback isn't handing off; he's running it, and so that's kind of, what he does instead of using a fullback a lot of times.
Yeah.
Is he here in 3 years? Is he in Nebraska in 3 years?
That question. I mean, I have no idea. If I have to give it, if I have to give an answer, yes, and here's why: because he's not going anywhere next year. Okay, you got to give him at least 5 years because if nothing else. I mean, it's not great right now, and that's putting it nicely. If nothing else, you got to stop the coaching carousel in Nebraska. You've got to show, even if Frost isn't here in 6 years or 3 years from now, after 6 years of his tenure, you got to show other coaches that you're willing to give somebody an extended opportunity and chance. When you fire Solich and Pelini, who won 9 games every year, and then Riley's gone after 3, I don't know that's a lot of pressure. I mean, people, their livelihoods, their families all depend on this. And so you got to show other coaches, whether Frost works out or not, that you're going to give them a legit opportunity to build something. So I would say yes because of that. And hopefully it's because he's having success is the bigger reason. But that would be the other, I guess.
And Adam, I think another point you just kind of touched on too, that also could be a reason you're having problems with the recruits, because a lot of people are, when you have their kids come in, they're family oriented, you start to see the consistent change. No one's going to want their kid to go there. Like, I don't know what's going to happen if my kid's there for 4 years, if they're going to be changing the coach in 3, and then my kid's going to be having to move here, do this, that, I'm going to have to do. Parents are not going to have to want to worry about that on top of sending their kids to college too.
No, that's a fair point. And Mo Berry put out a tweet yesterday, former Husker linebacker, and he was talking about a guy he played with, Luke Gifford, who's in the league now doing some pretty good things. And Luke, and I read the tweet, and basically Luke switched position 3 times at Nebraska. He had 3 different head coaches, 4 different D coordinators, 4 different defensive line coaches. Okay. And his point was, because all these kids were leaving, it's not always easy. Stick it out, and it can work out really well for you, And I mean, a guy like Joe Burrow might say, hey, well, I went somewhere else and it worked out pretty well too. So there's two sides to that argument. But my point is, there's been so much turnover, not just at the head coaching position. I mean, we're going to face one of our former D coordinators this weekend. Okay, if you're a Nebraska fan, maybe you'll get this. The strain is real. I mean, it's unbelievable, the strain, if you get that quote. But so. I mean, it's hard when you have constant turnover at the assistant coaches positions, the coordinator positions. So when I was being recruited, I remember I was in Coach Mike Bellatti's office in Oregon. And he said, there's 3 coaching staffs in this country. You got to remember, I'm getting a little old. So this is like 01. Okay. So much different time than now. He goes, there's 3 coaching staffs in this country that have had more tenured coaches, not just at the head coach position, but coordinators and assistant coaches than any other coach in the country. At the time, it was Penn State, Joe Paterno and his staff, okay? Nebraska, all right, Solich had just taken over for Osborne, who'd just been there for 25 years, and then Oregon with Bellotti and everything that he had built up there. And so for me, you just don't have that right now, and that can be an issue. Now, the flip side of that, Scott Frost was supposed to be the answer. Okay, he was supposed to be the long-term solution and kind of put those concerns to rest. 3 years ago, that was the mindset. Obviously, it's a little bit different at the moment.
It's definitely a different mindset right now, and you have to think about it like I was saying, it's got to be concerning. And you said, you're playing against your defensive coordinator this week. It's got to be one of these things where you have to stop the hemorrhaging from the coaching point is to get to the point where you can get your student athletes to come in, stay in, and go through the program to build that culture you're trying to build there, because you're trying to, like you said, he's trying to recreate what Tommy Osborne did back in the 90s, and it's kind of not, like you said, it's not working out as well. You're having problems with the guys leaving, and like you were saying, that might be a culture thing with what's going on with today's athlete, but also it's one of these things where a lot of things are changing with the NCAA athlete. We're talking about in a few years where we could see the NCAA athlete be getting paid for its likeness finally.
Yeah, I get asked that question probably more than any other question, because it applies to anybody who's a collegiate athlete fan. It's interesting because obviously these universities, they make hundreds of millions of dollars off the backs of these athletes. Okay. And a scholarship is worth a lot. Okay. Not just the amount of money that it would cost, but in life as an overall whole. But at the same time, you can't tell me that Joe Burrow, okay, was compensated for the same amount of money that he helped bring in. Okay. Now he's an extreme example. All right. But to me, it's like, I like there being a difference. The transfer portal, I hated that idea. Okay. Because you create free agency in college football. It now becomes very similar to the NFL. I like my college sports being different than my pro sports. I always have, and I probably always will. So how do you make it more fair to the athlete, yet distinct it from pro sports? And I've never had a good response to that. The best response I ever heard actually came from former Nebraska player Jason Peter. And he said, and however you want to figure it out, you figured out what is a fair amount to pay the collegiate athlete. Okay. And then I don't know if you want to put it in a CD or something else so that it grows over time, but they don't get paid that until they're 35. Okay. So that way they're not getting the money right here, right now. So they don't have that, I don't want to say entitled mindset, but that mindset that a pro player might have. So it's differentiated, yet over time, they are being compensated fairly at the same point, at the same time. So that's the best solution I've ever heard. I'm not a fan of the transfer portal. I do think it was incredibly unfair that a coach could just pick up and go at one point in time and a player was stuck. No matter, you had to sit out a year. I thought that was incredibly unfair, but I think this is too far the other way. It's kind of like the Big Ten. Hey, why do we have to be so stuck in cement about everything? All right. Yeah, we're not going to play. Now we're going to play. Now you have to miss 21 days if you test positive, and you have to play in 6 games to make the championship game, which maybe Ohio State can't do, which is going to screw over not over Ohio State, but the whole Big Ten. So thanks a lot, Kevin Warren. And why can't we be a little bit more flexible in a year that requires more flexibility than a gymnast? But why can't we do these things? So for me, there's got to be some sort of a middle ground when it comes to paying these guys. Instead,
and we're not just even talking about football either. There's so many different layers to this that kind of goes into it. I mean, I guess football's the more prevalent one, probably because it's either one or two as far as biggest NCAA, like as far as media wise, money wise, etc. I mean, the NCAA basketball tournament rivals it really pushes that envelope pretty hard. But I would have to say, like, what happens with what you were talking about, like how coaches were able to freely leave, and now, like you're saying, you don't like the portal, and I kind of agree that to the point where it is kind of a free agency type of thing. But I think there should be a process they should have to go through to prove like justifiable reason for them to just transfer. So it's not just this wild west when it comes to transferring in college athletics. What kind of happens right now?
Yeah, justifiable reason makes sense. And that's where I was kind of talking about the middle ground, the flexibility. Like if I'm a student athlete and I'm at UCF and Scott Frost takes the job at Nebraska, well, I committed to play for this guy. Now there's a new coach, and maybe Josh Heupel's a wonderful human being, but I don't want to play for him. Why do I have to sit out a year? Why can't it be examined by a committee or whatever the heck else however else they want to do it, and maybe I can transfer because it's a different circumstance.
I mean, they pay enough idiots to sit around and do nothing, right?
That they're missing.
I mean, they pay enough idiots to sit around and do nothing for most of these people. So why not put a committee together to kind of handle stuff like this? So you could say no, you're going to have to stick this out. You made a commitment. Okay, well, yeah, there's a kind of coaching changes, or they brought in a recruit and he's getting more. He's getting the betterment of playing time because of the new system. Yeah, sure, you can go wherever you want. Those are situations I would say, not just where it's just like, all right, all my buddies are over here and they're killing it out here in Ohio State. I want to try to go win some national championships and better my
2020 athlete though. It's just a 2020 athlete. Like anytime something doesn't go their way, the grass is greener somewhere else, and that's been happening at AAU levels all the way up. I'm watching it happen more and more as time progresses here, that if something doesn't go well at program A, or they're not giving me what I consider the best opportunity, it's easier for me to run away from it. And that's what's happening in sports, in college sports all over, because they see somebody else doing something different. Oh, this fits my skill set better. It's the coach's fault that I'm not on the field. It's the coordinator's fault. It's A, B, C, and D's fault besides accountability. Fault, and you see that more and more. And I'm not blaming young kids for that. It's just the way the direction's going now, because they're given that opportunity to say, oh, you know what, I don't want to stay here. I'm going to transfer out. But I'll tell you what will change all this conversation in Nebraska, and I know you guys are going to agree with me. It's just winning some football games. Like winning cures all. Like when you lose, the mascot gets blamed. You know what I mean? So like nobody can coach anymore. Nobody's smart enough. I mean, Scott Frost, like we talked about with Doug Peterson. Like I don't feel like the guy forgot how to coach. I mean, his offense has won a lot of gains for him, like you said, in Oregon, and then not only at UCF as a head coach. So I can't believe the guy forgot how to coach. I think it does take time to build your culture. It does take time for guys to stay. It does take time for you to decide which direction am I going here. Like in terms of the way I want my offense built. I think that all takes time. And some of it's just like a touch and go thing. Like, all right, this isn't working. But I do believe that you got to give him, I would give him 5-6 years to figure it out. Why not? Like you were saying, Adam, well, why not? Why not give him 5-6 years? He's a smart offensive guy. I think he's a good guy. And he does obviously recruit well. But James Franklin recruits well too at Penn State. And you see how that matters sometimes. But I do believe that Scott Frost is different. Scott Frost is a smart football guy. I think James Franklin's just a great recruiter. Scott Frost has shown he can be a great in-game coach throughout his tenure, right, of coaching, period, where James Franklin never has. So it's like, if you look at them parallels, like I would give this guy from an outsider looking in, I'll give him plenty of time to try to rebuild what's a great program.
Well, here's the one thing I think we can all agree on. I think we can all agree on it's the new Herbie Huskers' fault. Okay, that's whose fault it is. We can all agree on that. I do think something that would help Scott, because this is different than UCF. So UCF, I mean, how many guys were drafted off that team? I think it was about 5 different guys were drafted off that team. Well, he didn't bring those guys in. They were there. Okay, so he walked into a program that was 0-12, which is obviously horrifically horrible. He turned them around to 12-0. It's been well documented. So why hasn't he been able to have similar success at Nebraska? Not necessarily going 12-0, but just he's 10-19 right now. Okay, that's not even close. Why couldn't he just be 19-10 or something? So to me, it's kind of apples to oranges. All right, it's all still fruit, but it's different fruit. He walked into a locker room that was talented, that had ability, that had speed. Now, Shaquem Griffin, with the missing the hand, he put him on the field when the other coaching staff wouldn't. Mackenzie Milton was a guy that he helped find. Everybody else was pretty much there. And if you look into the details of what happened, that locker room, they kind of, from what I understand, basically didn't get along. I don't want to say they all hated each other, but they did not get along, and that's putting it very, very kindly. And he was able to create a culture where by the time he was done, they loved each other, and that turned it around. But he didn't have to recruit the guys. He didn't have to develop them. Okay, he just had to change how they felt about each other, and obviously the X's and O's and coach and things of that nature. And I shouldn't say just, because 0-12 to 12-0 is a big deal. At Nebraska, and the cupboard was not bare. I do get tired of hearing that, but it wasn't necessarily guys that fit his scheme. Like if you look back to the quarterbacks, Patrick O'Brien doesn't run his scheme, so he had to bring in Adrian Martinez and things of that nature. But he's had to actually build a program. He didn't walk into a situation where there's a bunch of guys that you can just kind of plug and play, and you just got to make sure that they don't all kill each other. He's actually got to bring them in, develop them, keep them here. And then there's times when he's flat out getting out coached. Let's be honest with you. He probably didn't have that level of competition in the AAC. And so now he's dealing with all these things he didn't deal with before. And so I think he's a smart guy. I do think one thing that would really help him, okay, the way he comes across in press conferences sometimes isn't the best. All right, it's the previous coaching staff's fault, or if our players would do this, and I don't watch every press conference. The last 3 I've watched, there's always a reference back to the 90s when he was playing, and I don't want to hear about that. I want to hear about how you're going to fix it now because you're the coach now. We all know what you did. It's phenomenal. It's awesome. You were booed and then you won the national title. Okay, what are you going to do 23 years later as the head coach at this university? I think that would help him right now, because I think that turns a lot of people off.
Yeah, I would agree.
That turned me off, and I'm not even in the circle, and that turned me off. Like I just got turned off by that statement. I'm like, oh, maybe he can't coach. It turned me off. I was like,
give him more time.
Yeah, I would agree.
Sound like a Cowboys fan talking about the past.
Yeah, it's riding the coattails of previous success. I'm going to transition with my last question here. I know you're a wrestling guy, Adam. We talked about it. Well, I wasn't on, but I was a viewer last time. You talked about, WWE and you had been offered a tryout. I'm just going to ask as a fan, what'd you think of Sting coming back the other night?
So it's funny, and you've probably seen this online. So Sting's one of my all-time favorite wrestlers. All right. Uh-huh. Probably Goldberg, Rock, Sting are my 3 top 3.
There you go.
If it was in the of course, he already did this in the WWE. It was different in the WWE. He'd never been there. He was the last holdout. But if you take that out of the equation, people would immediately say, oh, he's still in the spot from other people and he's taking their TV time. With AEW is kind of the golden child, and I love AEW, that everyone wants to work out, so it's viewed differently. That being said, I love it. I love it because he's not coming back as a wrestler. He's coming back, and he's someone you're going to see on TV. He's someone who should be on TV because he can still make an impact. You know, I wish The Rock would show up more in WWE. He doesn't need to. I just wish he would. You know, so I'm one of those guys that if you're not coming back, you know, the reason WWE is harder to watch right now, well, one of the reasons is because the people who win at WrestleMania are the people who won 20 years ago. They're not built for modern talent. So my point is Sting isn't going to come in, hopefully not, and that's not how he's been portrayed, as how he's going to come in and beat all these other guys and hold them down. He's going to come in and hopefully elevate the situation. And I'm just a big fan of Sting and AEW in general.
Yeah, and I think the ideal thing, you know, to me watching that situation unfold, it's almost like you could see it coming, because if you remember back in WCW days when he used to sit in the rafters and they did the thing with Darby Allin sitting in the rafters, I almost feel like they're going to have those two work together. Actually, I do have one more follow-up. 30 years of Undertaker, we just saw the end of that. What was your reactions to that, and I guess your reactions to the Undertaker's career?
Oh man, he was phenomenally phenomenal. There's no other way to say it. I still remember watching his debut. I was 6. I was born in 84. And I remember being like, I liked Hogan, but I preferred Warrior. But I remember being terrified, you know, and then a year later, oh my God, how's Hogan going to beat him? He's going to literally kill him and bury him 6 feet under. Like, he literally had me believing he was going to bury people 6 feet under. And then over time, you know, from the Minister of Darkness, you know, to the American Badass, and then he comes back, you know, as the Dead Man, just how he evolved over time and how you stay relevant. Like, Stone Cold Steve Austin was white freaking hot, okay? Maybe the greatest of all time. I've always slightly given the nod to Hogan because of the tenure and how he was able to evolve over time. Austin's heel turn fell flat, okay? Undertaker was a baby face, a heel, a baby face. He changed, he evolved. Every time he came out, it felt like a big deal. Whether he had just come out for 8 straight weeks in the 90s or whether he hadn't seen him in a year and he's getting ready for WrestleMania.
It's so funny because I'm not, you guys know, like I'm not the wrestling guy anymore. The ship sailed for me. I can't keep my mind focused on too many things. But no, I'm not into it anymore, but it's so spot on about the Undertaker. Like, you know, that was my heyday of wrestling, and, you know, and like anytime he comes out, it's an event, and it's, you know, it's really cool it's just really cool. That's all I had on that one.
I agree with pretty much everything Adam had to say there, from why a lot of people have staled on WWE to like the only thing we disagree on is you're a Warrior, kind of like my brother, and I was a Hogan guy. So, but like it's the same thing. You know, his tenure's a little bit better. I mean, like, and they just make it so predictable now. That's why you see AEW kind of having the success they have is because of what they have allowed to happen. They've allowed it to be created, basically. You completely had the market cornered to a point where nobody was able to do anything, and you literally wrote yourself into a place where you created another promotion to rival you. Congratulations.
Well, that's kind of where that ego comes into play. I've always said the worst thing that happened to pro wrestling was when WCW went away. Then they could do whatever they wanted, and it didn't matter if it absolutely stunk.
No, they had a 5-year run where what they were doing was still really relevant, was still pretty good. And then it got to a point towards the end of the Attitude Era. It was like, what are you doing?
Well, they still weren't used to having no competition. They were still, that mindset doesn't just float away. But then once it became like TNA tried to come up and that didn't work, and these other promotions have tried to come up here and there, you know, but nothing's really stuck. And so they got to the point where they could literally just write terrible television and they still make millions. So they didn't care. Hey, to their credit, they make more and more money every year. Now, I don't know about this year, but in normal years, they keep making more and more money. So whether the wrestling's good, I don't know. Vince McMahon keeps getting richer, though. So to kind of the Warrior Hogan thing, I'm always the guy, naturally, for whatever reason. I never liked the guy, okay? I always liked the guy who's trying to take down the guy. So Warrior Hogan. This is before WrestleMania.
I got one for you.
The Rock and Austin. So I always liked The Rock more than Austin.
All right, here's a better one for you then. Then who was your WCW guy?
It was Goldberg and Sting.
All right, mine was Goldberg and Diamond Dallas Page.
Okay, so Goldberg and Sting. So like I said, Goldberg was my favorite. Of course, with Goldberg, it was a lot of the football connection. I love the fact that he never spoke at first. The more he talked, the less he should have talked. I like when he didn't talk and he would just he literally won. Like, that's 2, for the streak, and who's next, and you're next, or whatever he'd say. And I just love that he would destroy people. People are like, oh, the 4 moves of doom. Well, if you want to go watch real wrestling, go to a high school gym or something. Like, this is entertainment. It drives me nuts when people are like criticizing the wrestling. Well, it's not really wrestling anyways. It's entertainment with wrestling in it, okay? So let's evaluate the entertainment aspect first. Anyways, no, Goldberg's not the best wrestler. He'll straight up tell you that. But I loved his intensity, his explosiveness, the fact that he was a D lineman, the fact that he played, football, Georgia, and the Atlanta Falcons. I loved all that. And then I love The Rock, obviously D lineman football, but even before I knew that, I didn't even know that at first. I just loved the way he would just verbally assassinate people. I just loved it. It was awesome. And then Sting, I was a Sting fan, kind of, with the blonde Sting and the rivalry with Ric Flair and all that.
Yeah.
Sting, and he was in the rafters, and he never spoke with the ball bat. And then I think he pointed at Hogan during their match and was like, "You're a dead man," or whatever. Dude, I was sold. I love that.
Yeah.
That persona is really what kind of blew Sting up. A lot of people didn't really, for whatever reason, didn't really care for that early era, yellow and green and white paint. They just didn't go for it. They did not resonate with them. As soon as he became the trench coat baseball bat guy, he was a different man.
I think it's a generational thing too. When you talk about in the 80s and the early 90s, that kind of flow when you the bright colors and the characters, and then obviously when WWE had to make their transition to the Attitude Era and WCW was pushing the edge, that character had to change. It had to evolve. You couldn't sit there and put on the neon face paint and have the crew cut blonde hair and with a little tail, and that wasn't gonna fly.
Oh, I forgot the tail.
The whole reason Hogan turned heel is because he kept getting more and more boos every night because people were tired of it. So then he turned heel, Bash at the Beach, 96, NWO was formed. Okay, and that kind of took off. I mean, that heel turn was huge for pro wrestling history. And so if you take Austin, though, with the success he had, and you put him in the 80s, I don't think it goes over that well. It's just not the right time, not the right mind. Just like Hogan from the 80s had to evolve into NWO Hollywood Hogan in the 90s. Austin was right place, right time, perfect person, perfect adversary, greatest heel ever in Vince McMahon. It was just, dude, you can't find a hotter time in wrestling history. And so with Sting, to your point, turning basically Crow at that exact same time, it was what people wanted to see at the right time.
Absolutely.
All entertainment, right? I mean, it's all about entertainment. It's all about drawing people in. That's why there's some reports that have surfaced over the last couple of years that the NFL might be staged. But I'm not here to get in that. We'll save that for. I don't know how that's even possible, but I think the running back who I forget his name, but there was a running back who came out and was like, "Oh, they don't want you to know the NFL staged." I mean, maybe if you want to tell me like the betting side is a little staged at times, sure, because I find it hard that Vegas is always around the number that much. I mean, I know they got smart guys, but I forget what running back that is. I got to go look that up. But there was a running back a couple years back who was like, "Yeah, everything's staged. Nothing's real here. It's like WWE," and it's like, how's that even possible? Too many guys to be involved in creating that to be fake.
I will tell you right now, it is not staged in any way, shape, or form. I did not go through frickin' 2-a-days in 105-degree heat for things to be frickin' staged. Trust me, it is not staged.
I believe it.
Thank you. I just wanted to confirm that because I just saw that tweet again. Like it just surfaced on my phone somehow again from a while back, and he was like, "Yeah, it's all staged." And I'm like, "What? Could you played in the league for like a 1 minute, so you probably got cut and you didn't like it."
Yeah, you're getting his 15 minutes of fame. If it was staged, every Super Bowl would come down to the last play in the last second. As we know, that does not happen. So,
if you want to tell me 2017 was staged, I would start buying into that. Like
with what we're saying now,
that run, I could say
that's believable.
A little staged, but no. I wanted to ask you. I mean, you're a guy who's had to go through the gauntlet. Was it all staged for you? Were all your injuries made up? You know what I mean? Like were injuries made up and all that stuff? No, of course not. You know.
No. My 10 surgeries and my 3.5 years of rehab I did were not. And nobody even knows about that hardly at all. So I need to get more publicity if it's staged. I need to be seeing those royalty checks coming in. I ain't getting enough yet.
Yeah, you know. Yeah, ask Alex Smith how staged that injury was for him too.
Right.
You know, Adam, I can't thank you enough for all the time you took this time again. Like I said, for everybody that's listening, I mean, this was the first athlete spotlight we did when everything happened. And just as a fan, man, like I get a little nervous talking to the athletes still, but like that first time, what you did for us and just helping us like be able to do it and know that we can do it and feel confident doing it. Like the first interview we did with you, I think it was over an hour long. It was supposed to be 20 minutes, and you just kept us that ball rolling, get that ball rolling for us. And I think you right. I'm not wrong. Adam was our first athlete on, right, guys?
Yeah.
So can't thank you enough
for having me. I always
First of many.
Yeah. Thank you, guys.
Yeah, can't thank you enough. Everybody that's out there listening, you can find Adam on Twitter. His handle is right at the bottom there, Adam Carriker 94. And go Washington, go Cornhuskers, and both. We'll say Washington's going in the right direction. We'll see about Nebraska. Maybe the next time they talk, we're not just talking about a great recruiting class. We're seeing it actually progress on the field. So, Adam, can't thank you enough for joining us, and we'll talk to you soon. Stay safe out there, and like I said, go Washington, go Cornhuskers, and everybody out there that joined us, we thank you as well. For Tom Renaud, Michael Chromiak, Steve Rochelle, Adam Carriker, everybody out there, stay tuned tonight. We have Fan Friday coming up, 9 o'clock tonight. You guys, all you got to do is send us your emails. You can hop in, conversate with us, yell and scream about what you don't like I say, and we can go head-to-head. So looking forward to jumping on with the crazies later and see what they have to say. That's going to be a heated one. So for everybody that joined us, thank you. Like, subscribe, follow, you know the deal. And thank our doc, make him yours, Dr. Paul Vidal, Specialized Physical Therapy, LLC, Burlington, Cherry Hill, Princeton locations. No more Princeton. Look at me. No more Princeton. Burlington, Cherry Hill locations. Find on the web, specializedphysicaltherapy.com. Thank you, everybody.
GBR.